Well, thanks for coming out this morning. So I first met Doug, it was actually for Memorial for Les Merhoff. So we had you come up, and Les is a mutual friend of ours, and for those of you who remember Les, and a lot of you probably do because of his enthusiasm, but he was really one of the champions of controlling invasive plants. And so some of the momentum today that carries forward against invasive species and what they mean as a threat, not only to other plants, but all the trophic levels that cascade upwards from these plants. And I guess that's part of Dr. Tallamy's message today. Much of that national initiative was set in place by Les. We've grown kind of close as a consequence of that because we share, I guess it would be an inordinate fondness for caterpillars. So, be that as it may. So Doug's an ecologist, he's a behaviorist, he's an evolutionary ecologist. His research interests are in behavioral ecology and conservation of biodiversity, impact of alien plants on our native ecosystems. So you're going to hear a lot about that today, and especially the impact of ornamentals, perhaps, in our own yards. Plant interactions, plant insect interactions are a big part of his research publications. He has about 65 peer-reviewed publications. I don't even know how many books you have, but it's like 89. Who's counting? You are. How many books? Is it 4? Is the 4th book out? Or 3?
Third book is almost done.
Okay. So Doug's professional goal in life is actually to change the way people landscape their commercial landscapes, but also residential properties, and to change how people regard their yards and the plants that they purchase. You know, his goal is really to change the world one business, one corporation at a time, one house, one residential yard at a time. And don't tell him that he's already a long way down achieving his goal. I mean, I don't know if you, many of you already have this book. If you brought it today, I bet you could get it signed. If you don't have one, he had a talk yesterday. I guess he sold out most in Stanford, but he's got about 6 or 7 left. But they also make a wonderful present. So even if you have one, you might think about buying one of his last 7 copies after the lecture. So Doug's absolutely wonderful colleague. In addition to championing planting native species, he's a great birder, and as you're going to see, he's going to be a fantastic photographer, and he's going to share some of those images with you today. So please welcome Doug Tallamy, and he's going to tell you about making the little things that run the world, but he's also going to tell you about the unmaking of these insects and when their ultimate fate. So that's, I guess, the other half of the story.
Thanks very much, Dave. Let's do sound check first. Is this okay? It sounds soft to me. Is this much better? Yeah. If I put it here, it doesn't seem to work, so I'm going to hold it. But, little things that run the world. I did not make that up. That's a quote from E.O. Wilson. E.O. Wilson, of course, is a very famous guy. Certainly the most famous entomologist of our time, one of the most famous biologists. He's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner, which I don't think any other scientist can claim. I was fortunate enough to meet him. I have been fortunate enough to meet him twice in my career. The first time was 1982. I just got my job at the University of Delaware, and there was a small conference on social insects in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado. Of course, E.O. is he's an ant man. He does social insects. So he was there, and it was small enough that after we had talks in the morning, people just went outside and milled around during a break. And I walked outside, and here's E.O. sitting on the curb, and nobody was sitting next to him. So I said, wow, here's my chance. And I'm not an outgoing guy, but I did. I went up and I sat next to E.O., and he turned, he looked at me, and he said, Hi, I'm Ed Wilson. I don't believe we met. I said, well, I'm Doug Tallamy. We talked for a few minutes. The break was over, went in, had more talks, had lunch, more talks, then another break in the afternoon. Well, now Leo and I were buds. So. I went outside, here he's sitting on the curb, and nobody's sitting next to him. So I sat down next to him. He turned and looked at me, he said, hi, I'm Ed Wilson. I don't believe we met. That's the first time. Second time, he was getting an award at the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences. He was getting the Ben Franklin Award. So I met him again. I also met Ben. It was more exciting to meet Leo. This was an award for lifetime achievement in everything he does, but it really focused on his efforts to save life on Earth, save biodiversity on Earth. And he's been doing that for a long time, or trying to do that. This is one of the first papers he wrote. It was in the first issue of Conservation Biology, 1987. It was a brand new journal. It was called The Little Things That Run the World. He's talking about the importance and conservation of invertebrates. But we're really talking about insects. Most of those invertebrates are insects. And it was a fairly simple message. He said that life as we know it depends on insects. And if you take insects away, lots of nasty things happen. The first thing that will happen is you're going to lose your flowering plants. Most of the flowering plants will disappear, which will change the structure of ecosystems, the physical structure of ecosystems, all terrestrial ecosystems all over the planet. It also will collapse most of the food webs that support our amphibians and reptiles and birds and mammals. And he claims most of those would disappear very quickly. The biosphere would rot slowly because major decomposers that speed up the recycling of nutrients would disappear. And oh yeah, humans would disappear as well. This was 1987, and it was more of a theoretical work. He was just trying to tell us insects are important. Nobody was worried about insects disappearing. So it was a somber message, but it was largely ignored. That's Cindy, by the way. You never met her. That's my wife. Question is, if humans depend on insects, why do we have National Insect Killing Week? Well, we did. This was 1929, and they campaigned to boost the sales of all brands of chemicals to rid the community of insects. And that was an official event, and it's not official anymore, but let's face it, we have National Insect Killing Day every day of the year. And now that it's spring, we'll get the commercials. Oh, I saw an insect, hire me and I will kill it for you, because the assumption is all insects are bad. And of course, society has bought into that big time. Now, even people who are worried about insect conservation haven't been that worried because they've had the idea that there are natural places out there and the insects are doing fine in those natural areas. And that was true in the past. It's no longer true, and there's two reasons that it's no longer true. One of them is we don't have enough natural areas anymore. I mean, that's the U.S., that's where we are. We are pretty much everywhere. We either have our cities and suburbs here in the east, and we have our corn and soybeans in the Midwest, and then we have our cattle. All those dark areas out there, there's a fence along every one of those places, and there are cows overgrazing. So we changed the nature of the continent big time. We have created our cities, and of course they were not designed to support insects. We've created our suburbs, and they're not designed to support insects. Even our exurbs, our rural areas, people go out to the country. Well, that's what they look like. They're not designed to support insects either. Then we have agriculture, 770 million acres of rangeland in the U.S. That's 222 times bigger than Connecticut. A lot of area out there where we have cattle. And it's designed in theory to support cattle. Insects could live there, but most of it is overgrazed. And as a matter of fact, food production on the terrestrial parts of planet Earth take up half of the area. And of course, those areas are not designed to support insects either. The second reason that our natural areas are not doing the job is that universally they are invaded with plants from someplace else. We have this phenomenon called invasive species. An invasive plant, by the way, it has to be a non-native plant. I've heard people talk about native plants being invasive. What you mean is a native plant can be aggressive, and that's true, but that means it's duking it out with other native plants the way it always has a normal interaction. when you bring a plant over from China, or from Eurasia, then it's over here without any natural enemies. The deer don't like it. It has a tremendous competitive advantage over our native plants. And this is what happens. This is White Clay Creek State Park. It's a park I drive by on the way to work when I go to work. And just 2 weeks from now, maybe 1 week from now, this is what it's going to look like. There's a period in the spring where plants from Asia leaf out before plants from North America. And that's what you're looking at here. What is leafing at? Every bit of plant green you see there is from Asia, and it's all the escapees from our garden. It's multiflora, rose and oriole, bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle and bush honeysuckle and miscanthus and barberry and burning bush and Callery pear and ailanthus and Norway maple and on, privet. They're all the ornamentals who no longer are in our garden. Now more than a third of the vegetation in many of our natural areas is from China. And we will talk about why that does not promote the sustainability of insects, because our insects, by and large, can't eat these plants from someplace else. So we are winning our war against insects. Even if it's an undeclared war, we are winning it. And we're just now starting to measure the extent to which we are winning it. And I'm going to credit the monarch butterfly and the honeybee for awakening us to this growing problem. Here's a little bit of data. Of course, the monarch's declining and the honeybee's got colony collapse syndrome. 50% of our Midwest native bee species are no longer in their historic ranges. They've disappeared from their historic ranges. We have 4 species of bumblebees that have declined 96% just in the last 20 years. So they're functionally extinct. When you've declined 96%, there's not enough of you out there any longer to do the jobs you're supposed to be doing in your ecosystems. And of course, at a rate of decline that fast, it really looks like they will disappear in the near future. We have 3 species that have already disappeared. 3 species of bumblebees are already extinct, 25% at risk of extinction. And these are generalist bees. They should be able to eat lots of different plants, and they should be doing better than our specialist bees. In Europe, they are measuring it in Europe, have been for a while. 30% of Europe's orthopterans, the grasshoppers, the katydids, the crickets, facing extinction. Germany's done a lot of work. 79%, and you probably have seen this, it's been in the New York Times a couple of times. 79% of Germany's flying insects have disappeared since 1989. 46 species of moths and butterflies have already completely disappeared from Germany. And here's the killer. Invertebrate abundance, and again, think insects, has declined globally by 45%. Remember, little things that run the world. These are the creatures that are keeping us alive. They're disappearing, and we've just lost half of them. This ought to be a major, major concern for everybody on the planet. It's getting a little bit of mention, but most people are not worried about it. And of course, if you take away insects, you take away all the things that depend on insects. Remember Eo's list there? A lot of things. And again, in most cases, we don't measure what's happening to these other creatures, but so many things depend on insects. All spiders, for example, eat insects, or they eat other spiders that eat insects. So if we lost our insects, we would lose those amphibians, the frogs, the toads, well, all of them. Our lizards, they're all eating insects, our bats are eating insects. Our rodents depend on insects far more than we realize because they're really good food. Some studies have found that pound for pound, there's twice as much protein in insect meat as there is in beef. And they have organs in their abdomen called fat bodies that allow these little guys to grow quickly and reproduce quickly. And if you're a little creature, if you're a little mouse, that's what you want to do, because there's a lot of things that want to eat you, so you've got to reproduce very quickly. But for the very same reasons, larger organisms are depending on insects as well. The skunk is digging up your yard, there's grubs in your yard, possums eat a lot of insects, raccoons eat a lot of insects. Even things we don't think of as insectivores depend on insects. 25% of a red fox's diet is insects. 23% of a black bear's diet is insects. So it doesn't matter how big you are, you need insects. Even if you don't eat insects, you need insects. This is a sharpshin hawk, it's a bird predator. You might think, well, I can get rid of all the birds in my neighborhood and I'll still have sharpshin hawks. But think about it, the birds this guy's eating needed insects to become birds. So he eats them indirectly. So does our garter snake. He's not eating insects directly, but he's eating the frogs and so it's the insects. But again, we're not measuring how those other things are doing. We are measuring what's happening to our birds. We have something called the State of the Birds Report, comes out every year. I have to update this, although I'm afraid to, because in 2016, it's a pretty miserable state of our birds. 432 species of North American birds at risk of extinction now. Now that doesn't mean there's only 5 left of each one of those. That's not the time to get excited. The time to get excited is when you see steep population declines. Because unless you turn around those declines, they just keep right going, and that's what the risk of extinction is. That's a third of our bird species in North America, now considered to be at risk. We have 1.5 billion fewer breeding birds in North America today than we had just 40 years ago. And let me remind you that a billion is 1,000 million. And this is the problem with shifting baseline. Anybody here who's younger than 40 doesn't remember a time when we had 1.5 billion more birds, more breeding birds in North America, which means you don't miss them. So you think when you walk outside and it's quiet, that's normal. It's not normal. It's the new normal, but it's not a good normal. So the point about this talk is, we've got to turn this around. We really do. And we're going to turn around by focusing on the property that we own. 85.6% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. 95% of Texas is privately owned. 83% of the entire U.S. is privately owned. So if we only think about conservation in terms of public lands and parks, forget it, it's not nearly enough land. We have to do this where we own our property. So from now on, just think about the land you own, or if you're a student, the land you're going to own, or the land your parents own. What can you do to improve its ecological integrity? And if you only worry about your property, and everybody does that, we're just about done. We'll worry about the public places later on. So let's say you live here. You have a long way to go. This house was designed for aesthetic purposes only, and that's how we do it these days. So we're talking about saving insects, about making insects. We have to do it in properties like this. Roy Dennis is a land manager in England, recently said that land ownership is more than a privilege, it is a responsibility. And that is right on. When you think about where life in this universe is, it's in a very thin layer on planet Earth called the biosphere. Very thin. All the life there. Forget about Mars and all these other places where maybe we've got a bacterium or something. The life that's going to be important to us is right there on the surface of planet Earth. And we have carved it up. Tom owns this, Dick owns this, Harry owns this. But along with that ownership comes the responsibility of supporting all the life in the universe. We haven't thought about that in the past, but that's the way it is these days, because there's not enough unowned nature out there doing the job anymore. Just trying to convince you that we must start doing this at home. That Stephen Hawking, recently passed away, brilliant guy. He did kid around, and I don't know if he was kidding now, but he said, we're destroying Earth, so we better look for another planet. The problem with that is a lot of people are talking that way. This guy's talking this way. Have you seen this book, brand new book? The Future of Humanity, whether due to climate change or the depletion of finite resources, we must face the reality that humans will someday need to leave planet Earth in order to survive as a species. Don't count on it, folks. Don't count. Where are we going? We're going to Mars, where the carrying capacity for life is 0. It's going to be easier to create a life support system on Mars than to fix the one we have here. We have to get serious about fixing the Earth, and we have to get serious about putting the resources required into doing it. I'm not trying to destroy space exploration, but if you think that's the future of humanity, forget it. Forget it. This is the future of humanity right there. Neighbor down the street, that's what it looks like. If we're going to create living landscapes, we have to do it on properties like this. Which means we have to raise the bar about what we're asking those properties to do. In the past, we've asked them to be pretty. And of course, people have different ideas of what pretty is, but this guy's idea is big lawn. That's pretty. So, but he has no plants. This Bradford pear is actually on the neighbor's head. So this guy's no plant. So he doesn't go to the nursery. But if he did, he'd look for something that was pretty. Maybe it could be a screen or anchor or focal point, but it's all been about aesthetics without any thought at all to the ecological roles that the plants we choose for our landscapes have to be playing. But we could, this is how we have to think in the future, we get a pretty plant, but it also has to have food web value. It's got to be supporting tiers of trophic levels of food right at home. It's got to be protecting our watershed. Everybody lives in a watershed. Nobody has the right to destroy the watershed. That's my watershed right there. And this guy is actively destroying it with his giant lawn. Now he doesn't think that way, but that's what he's doing. We also have to sequester carbon. Too much carbon in the air, you know this story. A third of it is in the atmosphere from the plants we have removed from planet Earth in the last 10,000 years. A third of it. If we put those plants back, or at least a lot of them back, it's a very cheap, easy, fast, relatively fast way of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. And I used to think, well, the carbon is tied up in the trees, and it is. But most of the carbon is pumped into the soil by these plants, big and small ones. The soil scientists are now telling us that our soils can sequester 7 times the amount of carbon, total carbon that's in the atmosphere. So there's the solution. Just put it in the soil. Who's going to put it in the soil? Our plants are going to put it in the soil. We got to put the plants back. We have to support our pollinators. We have to moderate our weather. We've got to have diverse systems of natural enemies. All of that has to happen at home. So we can do this, we must do this on landscapes like that, or we're going to lose the life that supports us, that runs our ecosystems. So let's just talk about that briefly. Why do we need other life forms? Why do we need biodiversity? This is not intuitively obvious. Because in our little worlds, we drive around, we get our water from the tap, we go to Walmart and get everything we need. We don't think about the life forms required to supply all of those things for us. So let's just review that. It is the plants and animals in our ecosystems that produce what we call ecosystem services. We should actually call them biodiversity services, because that's what comprises an ecosystem. What's a biodiversity service? Again, it's all those things that keep us alive on planet Earth. And every time we lose a species, no matter how large or insignificant it seems to us, every time you lose one from an ecosystem, that ecosystem is less productive. That was predicted in 1955 by Robert MacArthur, and it has since been demonstrated a number of times in very long, complex studies. So the number of species in an ecosystem predicts how productive it's going to be, how many ecosystem services it will make, and every time we degrade an ecosystem, you're getting fewer services. And you might think, well, we've got complex ecosystems out there, but ecosystems function locally. So think of the ecosystem at your house. How many species do you have at your house? Go out and count them. I can guarantee, no matter how diverse your house is, it is fewer than used to be there. So your local ecosystem is degraded because you live there. We've got to turn that around and build landscapes that not only support local ecosystems, but build them, that, whatever the word I'm looking for, increase their productivity. Support, I'll think that's a green jay. And of course, there was the Millennial Ecosystem Assessment in 2005. I think it was 170 scientists from around the world got together, spent 5 years measuring the planet's ability to support us, measuring those ecosystem services. And their unhappy conclusion is that at that time we had already degraded the planet's ability to support us by 60%. That was 2005. I can guarantee it hasn't improved since then. That's the ocean. It's not a recycling plant. This guy's going out to fish. Ocean life. That's the same as taking planet Earth and shrinking it by 60%. At the same time, we are expanding our population, we're growing our economies. We have this perpetual growth model, as if we can do this forever. We can grow. We can increase our population, we can increase our economies at the same rate that planet Earth is growing. Are any economists in here? You can start throwing things. I know, y'all think I'm crazy when I say that, but go to Cape Town, South Africa in July. You can help them celebrate Day Zero, when 2 million people run out of water. Yes, they have wasted it, but we all waste it. And I said this the other day in an audience. There was a woman from Cape Town there. She said, "We have plenty of water." We just need to drill down and get it. No. Yes, we have water in the ground, but that was laid down 10,000 years ago. It's not being replenished. It is a finite resource. To make our populations larger than the amount of water, a very basic ecosystem service that is there to support us, that's not sustainable. Not smart. So, until the earth starts growing physically, we need to grow it by putting the plants back, grow its capacity to support us, by putting at least some of the plants back that we have removed over the eons. That's increasing the Earth's carrying capacity. We cannot increase the Earth's carrying capacity without making insects. So it is actually a theme to this. If we succeed in making insects, we have increased the Earth's carrying capacity. So how do we do that? What does it take to make insects? It takes energy. That's what it takes to make all life forms. In the case of the vast majority of life forms, that energy comes from the sun. We have photosynthesis, capturing the energy. Photosynthesis allows us and almost everything else to eat sunlight. So again, if you take away the plants, you can eat sunlight without them. And I wish you luck there. It's taking carbon dioxide from the air, the good thing, take it out, water from the ground, producing the oxygen. We don't talk about that, but yeah, I need that. Now the energy from the sun is tied up in the carbon bonds of simple sugars and carbohydrates, which is food. That is the food that drives our food webs. That's what plants are doing for us. And of course, the more plants you have, the more food you make, the more diverse plants you have, the more diverse life forms you can have eating that food. So if we're going to make insects, first we need to make plants. The plants are already made. We just need to include them in our local ecosystems. Okay, which insects are we going to make at home? We have a lot of insects out there. Nobody has a property big enough to support all of them. So let's focus on what I'm going to claim are the most important insects. And if you talk to other entomologists who work on different groups, they'll probably have a different answer, but listen to me. We have 3 to 4 million species of insects worldwide, 164,000 described species in the US. It's probably an old number, isn't it, Dave? It's probably a little bit higher, but a lot of undescribed species in the US. So again, you're not going to support all of them at home. Let's figure out which ones we are going to support. They are occupying almost every single niche that is out there. We have insects that bore in stems. We have insects that eat dead wood, developing wood, like our eyed click beetle here. A lot of insects eat leaves. A lot of insects eat roots. That's a weevil. Weevil that's the largest family of multicellular organisms in the world, but you don't see that many. You don't see them because as larvae they're eating roots or they're buried in seeds, and they're nocturnal as adults for the most part. So they're out there, we just don't run into them very much. Leaf litter. Dave told me a couple of years ago we've got 70 species of moths that eat leaf litter. Who knew? So leaf litter, every time you rake it up, throw it away, 70 species of moths. Goodbye. Then we've got all this aquatic goo. We have plant material that falls into our swamps and our streams, and it turns into that black muck that is associated with that. Well, that's the energy that drives our aquatic ecosystems. And they produce a lot of insects, things like mayflies and snowflies and caddisflies and chironomic midges. They come off by bazillions, so they're important components of food webs as well. And if you are making insects, you're making insect predators, the things that eat insects. The larvae of this horsefly here is living in that aquatic goo, eating. It's a predator, eating the things that live there. So we have a number of insect predators. We've got robber flies, and we've got assassin bugs, and dragonflies, and many, many others. We have 3,000 species of spiders. They're not insects. They are invertebrates. They are very important predators, very important components of our food webs. So even though we're talking about making insects, we're not going to forget these guys as well. Every time you see a spider, stop killing it. It's not going to hurt you. All right, each one of these insects form a particular guild. It's a group of organisms doing the same thing. And all of those guilds are necessary to run our ecosystems, but they don't all contribute equally to our ecosystem. So let's focus on the ones that are contributing the most, and I'm going to claim that's the insects that maintain plant diversity. Plants are the first trophic level, and the more numerous and diverse they are, the healthier that trophic level is, and the healthier everything above it is. and then the insects that move the energy from the first trophic level out to other organisms. So those are the two groups I would like to focus on, and that is our pollinators and our caterpillars. So let's start with pollinators. Let's define what a pollinator is. Everybody thinks, a lot of people think, most people think that if you see an insect at a flower, it is a pollinator. But I'm going to call them flower visitors instead, because most of those insects rarely or never actually are moving pollen from the male parts of the flower to the female parts of the flower. They're taking advantage of the pollen, they're eating it, or they're getting nectar. They're important components of our ecosystems, but just because there's an insect at your zinnia doesn't mean it's a pollinator or that you're actually supporting pollinators. Pollinators, lots of insects pollinate, but of course the ones that do it the best, the ones that are really focused on pollinating, are largely our bees, our native bees. Well, before we talk about those bees, let's talk about why we need pollinators. This is another thing that drives me crazy. I hear it everywhere, NPR, we need pollinators because they pollinate our crops, because they pollinate a third of our crops, as if that's the only reason we need pollinators. They do. They pollinate a third of our crops, and yes, that's important, but they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we would lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. It is not an option. Forget our crops. In China, they're pollinating the crops with paintbrushes. So when somebody invents a paintbrush machine here, or I hear the little bee robots that are going to pollinate, forget it. We can't lose our pollinators, even if we had no crops at all. Okay, who are our pollinators? We have one species of introduced honeybee. It's very good at pollinating a number of our introduced crop plants because they all evolved together over there in Eurasia. We have 4,000 species of native bees that did, they and a few mammals and birds did all of the pollination in North America before the honeybee came over. And we have maybe 14,000 species of moths and butterflies in North America, at least 2,000 that are not described yet. And many of these are important pollinators. Most of those are active at night when we're not looking. Go out at night this summer when your milkweed is in bloom and look at the activity around those flowers at night. There are many flowers that only put out their scent at night, so you get a lot of pollinating activity that you don't appreciate at all. So we're gonna make moths particularly important pollinators, even though they're also important in moving energy to higher trophic levels. So they're important on every level out there. Let's also talk about what is not a bee. When I say to people, I want you to put pollinators in your yard, and I want you to make happy homes for bees, they say, no, I don't want any bees because I don't want to be stung, and I'm allergic, and I don't want to be stung. And I appreciate that. But what is stinging us almost all the time is this guy's yellow jackets. They are not bees. They are wasps. They are social wasps, and they eat my caterpillars. So I'm not promoting the other part of it. We're not going to actively go out and kill them all, but this is not what we're talking about. They are social wasps that are aggressively protecting their social hives. This is yellow jackets, it's bald-faced hornets, which are close relative, paper wasps. Not what we're talking about here. We're talking about bees that are almost never going to sting you. You have to work to get these native bees to sting you. Honeybee, not native, also highly social, large hives, and they do defend it. So if you're getting near their hive, they can get nasty. But most of these native bees are not social. They're solitary. They're living in various places that we'll talk about. So they're not defending large hives. And you can go out, you can pet these guys, and they're not going to hurt you. And I'm serious. We have videos doing that. They're really not going to hurt you. All right, where are we going to save our bees? We have to provide what they need. And the first thing they need is a place to live. They live in the ground, they live in woody stems, they live in pithy stems. That covers most of their nesting needs. So let's talk about ground nesters first. It's pretty easy to come up with what they need. You need ground. If you have a slight south facing slope, that they prefer that, particularly the early spring ones. It warms up early in the spring. This is a Caleves bee. They're already out at my house. They're out even though there's still snow on the ground, or there was when I left, looking for flowering plants. Very shy. As soon as your shadow hits them, they dive back in the ground. You need soil that is diggable. So if you have hard, packed clay, it's not a good place for ground nesting bees. But anything else, they're pretty good at handling. Well, you need to have a space that you're not going to be walking on or driving on or mowing all summer long. So a little dedicated space for your ground nesting bees so that they can nest in an undisturbed place. 50 stem nesters, they'll hollow out the stems of lots of plants that the internal structure of the stem is pith. So it's easy to hollow out. This is a rose stem, but it illustrates what they're doing. They will sequentially make a number of cells. And the first cell is where they're going to lay their egg. The larva hatches and they pack it full of pollen. That's what baby bees eat. So this guy's nearing maturity. He's eating most of the pollen. This one's a little bit younger yet. This one's just ready to hatch and eat the pollen there. And then when they mature, they tunnel out through the stem right here. But you need these spaces here. And this brings up the way we handle particularly our flower beds with black-eyed Susans and hydrangea that looks like it's dead, goldenrod. Those are the pithy stems in which these guys are spending the winter. They spend the winter as pre-pupae in those little cells, and when we mow it all down in the fall, we've just killed them all. We've also removed all of the seed stock that is going to feed our sparrows and our cuckoos and things all winter long. So we need to find ways of neatening up in the fall without destroying all the places where these guys over winter. Woody stem nesters are doing exactly the same thing, but they use wood that is easily hollowed out. So this is an elderberry stem that has already produced a number of bees. Elderberry is great because it's soft wood. Elderberry dies back regularly, doesn't live very long, so if you have an elderberry bush, there's probably a dead stem on it, and what do? If you're a good gardener, you get your clippers and you cut it out. So you just remove the place where these bees nest. Most of our suburban, our residential neighborhoods do not have the woody material that many of our bees require. So we've invented something called bee hotels. We love bee hotels. Humans love bee hotels more than bees. But they work. The bees come in all these different size holes and they tunnel in there, and these mason bees and other wood borers do well in these bee hotels, except the research is showing they're not a great idea. For one simple reason, we're putting all of our bees in one basket. When predators or diseases find this concentration of bees, they go crazy. So it's a great way to really decrease bee mortality by putting them all in one place. I think bee hotels are a good idea, but let's have just a few units that are they can be together, but then isolate them, spread them throughout your property, so that if predator or disease finds one of them, it's not finding all of them. What do bees need to reproduce? They need pollen, they need nectar, we know that, and they need it all the time. Here's data from Jared Fowler and Sam Droege. Sam Droge's Mr. Bee, by the way, and this data from New England. Looking at the number of bee species active from March all the way to November. So you get most of the bee species here in May and June, but right now there are bees out and they go all the way to November, which means you need forage for them. You need blooming plants for these bee species from March all the way to November. And if you're trying to promote bees at your house, that's the biggest challenge. How do you get this sequence of flowering plants? Which plants should you use? This is Sam has said a lot of things, but that's got to be the most important thing he's ever said. You want to plant in a way that meets the needs of our bee specialists. There are bees that will only reproduce on particular genera of plants. If you don't have those genera of plants in your yard, you don't have those bees. Why do we worry about the generalists? Because the generalists will go to all those plants that the specialists need. So the generalists will take care of themselves. If we only plant pollinator gardens for generalists, we're losing our specialists. And if you look at the plants we choose for our pollinator gardens, so many of them are focusing on generalists. Why do bees specialize? They specialize because plants differ in just about every way from each other. They have a differing phenology, different time of the year or day that they flower. They look different, they smell different. The pollen morphology is species specific, and bees have morphologies that are specific to picking up particular pollens. The nutritional value varies tremendously. Protein value of pollen varies from 5% to 90%. Tremendous variation. So bees specialize on particular genera so they can take advantage of all of these differences here. There are 57 bee species in New England that specialize only on one or two plant genera. So again, you miss this plant genera, you miss 57 bee species. Here's a ranking of the top ones that Fowler and Kirby have found. Goldenrod's #1 in New England. If you go to the Midwest, it's a little bit different. Sunflowers, #1. But 11 species only on goldenrods, 8 more on native willows, 7 more on asters, 5 more on blueberries. Just these top 4 genera give you, 30-some species of native bees. And if you don't have those in your yard, you've lost an awful lot of bee species. There's a whole lot we don't know about generalist or about specialist bees. So we're continuing to work on that. This list will certainly be updated. But it gives you an idea. Try to use the plants that we know support the most specialists. And again, the generalists would go to all of those plants. If you want Andrena asteroides, you need native asters. If you want Andrena aeruginosa, you need spring beauties. Pallades albescens, only on false indigo. This is what we're talking about here. A summary of our current knowledge of bee specialists can be found in a self-published book by Heather Holm, 2 years old at this point, and it focuses on the bees in the northern Midwest, but there are many of the same species that you have here in New England, so this is a good resource that will tell you about our specialist bees. Okay, now bees again are critical in terms of making the diversity, supporting the diversity of the plants that are out there, but in terms of supplying energy for food webs directly, they're not very good. Very few things eat bees. There are a few, orchard, the western oriole, few species of birds specialize in bees, but most of them don't. So making pollinators only, and that's all I hear the public talking about, it's good for the plants, but it's not good for those food webs. We need to create the things that are passing the energy onto food webs, and I believe it is caterpillars doing that the best. If anybody, we need some more data to support that, but we've got a lot of information. Caterpillars do really seem to be transferring more energy from plants to other creatures. So let's make caterpillars, and let's do it at home. And let's emphasize why we need so many caterpillars. And we're going to use bird food webs to demonstrate that, because we're learning more and more about what birds eat. 96% of our birds rear their young on insects, and we're learning most of those insects are caterpillars. So let's ask the question, why caterpillars? You're not going to be able to breed in an area, if you're a bird, if there's not enough caterpillars. So why caterpillars? What is special about caterpillars? We got all these other insects out there. Why are the birds focusing on caterpillars? Now I've been thinking about this, and I think maybe it's because they're beautiful. We got a lot of beautiful caterpillars. Pandora sphinx, black-spotted prominent, the major digtana, purple-crested slug, Syngicantha caterpillars, very beautiful. Coletta silk moth, spiny rose caterpillar, even the black swallowtail, common around here, but very beautiful. Hieroglyphic moth, this is my favorite, the spun-glass caterpillar. Or it could be because they have cool names, like the green marble, the once charred pumpkin, the confused woodgrain, the cynical grandpat, the neighbor, the Donald. I know it's some of you right there. So in addition to being beautiful and having cool names, I think there's some practical reasons. One of them is that most of these caterpillars are soft. That means you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring the esophagus. And if you've ever watched a parent bird feed its young, that's what it does. It takes its bill and like a plunger, just stuffs it down there. They're also relatively large. A medium-sized caterpillar equals the biomass of 200 aphids. So some of our smaller birds do chase aphids, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar? They're nutritious. They're very high in protein, they're very high in fat, and they have a very low amount of chitin, of exoskeleton, compared to the amount of food they offer compared to other insects. Think of beetles. They're like little tanks. A lot of exoskeleton, which is undigestible and not that much food inside. And it turns out they're the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. And later on in the season, birds get a lot of carotenoids from berries, but the berries haven't been produced in the spring, and the birds are reproducing. I mentioned carotenoids because we vertebrates don't make them. They're only made by plants. So birds don't make carotenoids, we humans don't make carotenoids, yet they are important. They're not just important, they're critical components of healthy diets. And that's why my wife Cindy says, I have to eat my carrots to get my beta carotene, I have to eat my tomatoes to get my lycopene, my whatever that is to get my lutein. She makes sure I eat all that stuff because she wants to stimulate my immune system. These are antioxidants. They run around our body and protect our DNA from oxidative damage, very important. Improve color vision. When your mother said eat your carrots, you'll see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but it turns out she was right. They improve sperm vitality. Who doesn't need that? Improve sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about particularly the male birds. They're taking the carotenoids and building pigments out of them. This is a male prothonotary warbler. He is bright yellow because he has had access to lots of luteins. And of course, the brighter yellow he is, the more ladies he attracts. Well, Mr. Prothonotary is not eating plants. Actually, he never eats plants. He's a total insectivore. So he's not going to get his carotenoids from plants. He's got to get them from something that did eat plants. And that something is insects. But here's the key. Caterpillars have twice as many carotenoids as other types of insects. This is a data set from Europe. And we just replicated this. We got the results back 2 weeks ago. In some of our measurements, caterpillars had 15 times more carotenoids than other types of insects. 3 times more than spiders. So spiders are important components of bird food webs, but caterpillars are driving the system. In terms of getting carotenoids, you need caterpillars. Which means caterpillars may not be optional parts of bird diets, they may be essential for a healthy bird diet. How many caterpillars are required to rear a clutch of young? We have data from chickadees, tiny little birds. This is the Carolina chickadee. You know, we think of them as seed eaters because they're eating seed in the wintertime, but when they're rearing their young, it's all caterpillars. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars required to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they fledge. That's 16 days in the nest. After they fledge, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 30 days, but they're flying all over the place so nobody can count them. So just to the point where they leave the nest, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. And chickadees weigh 1/3 of an ounce. It's 4 pennies worth of bird. So if you wanted a healthy community of birds out there in your neighborhood, think of the number of caterpillars that you need. How do we make that many caterpillars? Let's talk about how not to make that many caterpillars. This is a typical house. I'm sorry to say. I don't know how many acres it is, but I do know that before it became a giant lawn to look like Gone with the Wind, it had thousands of species. There were literally thousands of species in this space, and now they are all gone with the wind, so that we can enjoy this aesthetic. We worship the lawn. We still have Lawn of the Month award. People send me these things. This is from where? St. Louis. So this family has gotten an award for having the deadest landscape. We have to change the way we think. We add caterpillars to landscapes by adding the plants that make them. We're just going to go over host plant specialization because it's a critical component of why you need particular plants. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction, so they loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals. Secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. It's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects in the world from eating most of the plants of the world. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? They specialize. 90% of the insects that eat plants and only reproduce on 1 or 2 plant lineages. We call them host plant specialists. And what they've done is, over evolutionary time, they pick plant lineages that share common cocktails of chemical defenses, and they develop the enzymes and the behavioral adaptations and the life history adaptations that allow them to eat those plants without dying. But again, long period of exposure to those plants for all these adaptations to fall into place. At the Does not happen overnight. And that's why when we bring in burning bush and cover the understory of all of New England with burning bush, it's a problem because that plant is from Asia, and very few of our caterpillars, none of our caterpillars, well, I shouldn't say, very few caterpillars are able to eat euonymus, period, and almost none are able to eat burning bush here because it hasn't been here long enough for all those specialized adaptations to occur. I want to use the monarch butterfly as an example because you already know half the story of the monarch. You know that it is a specialist on milkweeds. Now, there's nothing special about the specialization of monarchs on milkweeds. It's a typical host plant specialist, eats any of the milkweeds in the genus Asclepias. Well, milkweeds are toxic plants. They have compounds in them called cardiac glycosides. If we were to eat milkweeds, eat enough of them, they would stop our heart. That's what cardiac glycosides do. They don't stop the monarch's heart, and the monarchs do have a heart. Because they've got those enzymes that store and excrete and sequester those and detoxify those cardiac glycosides, works well for them. That's half the story. The other half of the story is that sticky latex sap that is in milkweeds. That's how they get their common name. When you break open a milkweed leaf, this white goo comes out. If you get it on your finger, you always wipe it off right away, but don't wipe it off. Let it sit there for a minute or so, and you will see it gels. On exposure to air, it becomes like chewing gum. And that's the defensive property of that stuff. If it gets in the mouth parts of a caterpillar, it glues them shut. And then the caterpillar starves to death. But here we have caterpillar, we have milkweed, we have monarch caterpillars eating milkweeds. How do they avoid this sticky latex sap? This is something you can watch right in your yard if you plant milkweeds. The caterpillar will crawl up onto a leaf that hasn't eaten yet. The first thing it does, typically go to the end and start to eat, and if any latex sap starts to come out, stops right away, turns around and walks maybe 2/3 back up the leaf and chews through the liquid. That's a behavioral adaptation. What it's doing is blocking the canals that shunt the latex sap down to the distal end of the leaf. It's a very simple behavioral adaptation, but now the monarch can go down and eat the leaf without any latex sap coming out. And most other insects can't do that. Specialization. That, of course, flags the leaves. If you're a monarch hunter, you can drive down the road and look for milkweed patches. If you see flag leaves, you know that monarchs are there or have been there recently. Okay, those are the upsides of specialization. Now the monarch physiologically and behaviorally can eat a plant that is unavailable to most other insects. And that's the upside. The downside of specialization is that now that's all it can eat. So by focusing all of its evolutionary effort on that one genus of plants, it has not spent any time developing the adaptations required to get around the tannins that are in oak leaves, or the cucurbitaceans and cucurbits, or the nicotine in tobacco, or the cyanide in cherries, and on and on and on. And it still works well for the monarchs as long as you have milkweeds around. But if you replace milkweeds with corn and soybean or lawn, the monarch disappears. And I hear a lot of people say, well, insects can adapt. They adapt very quickly. The monarch is not going to eat corn and soybeans. That's like asking us to adapt. It would be more convenient if I could fly home with my own wings. It's not going to happen. I'm kind of constrained. So are these guys. We've lost 96% of our monarchs because we've taken the milkweeds out of our landscapes. There's several problems with monarchs, but depriving them of food is certainly one thing. So don't expect monarchs to adapt to other host plants. We've also taken away the forage that they need as they're flying south to Mexico. They're all overwintering in Mexico. And we've taken away the asters and the goldenrods and the fall-blooming plants that give them the energy to get down to Mexico. And the only reason we really know that monarchs are declining is because they all go to one place and we can count them. The other insects are declining as well, but they're not in one place and nobody's counting. Okay, we can measure what happens to these native plant communities when we allow non-native plants to come in and displace native plant communities. We can measure what happens to food webs, and that's what we're talking about. And that's what we've been doing in my lab for the last about 12 years now. We have a number of papers, more coming out. I have a very productive grad student who's finishing up her work. So you can read those papers. We didn't try to make this easy for you, but we always get the same answer. So read one and you've got the answer. But I happen to know you're not going to read any of those papers. So let's talk about something that you can do. You you do at home, you can do in your churchyard, in your schoolyard. I call it my 12 by 12 experiment. This is an exercise in critical thinking. In today's world of fake news, don't believe anything anybody says. Test it for yourself. You're going to go outside and measure what these plants are doing. And you can do it in a 12 by 12 section. So in this case, we've staked it out, and the plants that are in there are lawn. You can get on your hands and knees on Wednesday and measure all the biodiversity in there, and then on Saturday, of course, you mow it and kill it all. Or we can decide, you get to decide how much life is going to be sustained in that 12 by 12 section by choosing how many plants you put there and which plant species you put there. Let's put an oak in that space. So this is one I planted from an acorn. It's a white oak. I planted it 14 years before I took that picture. Demonstrates two things about oaks, by the way. First of all, they grow. I hear landscapers tell people all the time, don't plant an oak, you won't live long enough to enjoy it. I'm enjoying it. It doesn't have to be 300 years old before you enjoy it. It also is free, by the way. When you start with a small plant, you get a much healthier plant, and it grows faster than that giant $3,000 oak that you had to root prune to move and spend thousands of dollars to move. Has a 50% chance of dying. So be a little patient, forget the instant gratification, and you will get a much healthier plant starting small. All right, let's do our 12 by 12 experiment. Let's count the caterpillars on the lower branches of that tree. We're not going to climb ladders or anything, just walk around, count the caterpillars. We're going to do it on July 25th, 2014, and we're going to find 410 caterpillars from 19 different species. And we're going to stand back and take that picture so that I can ask you, how many of those caterpillars do you see? How much caterpillar damage do you see? That's what we worry about. You don't see any, and this is the distance at which we view our trees. If I looked at any one of those leaves, almost all of them have something eaten out of it. There's yellow-necked caterpillar right here that actually strips branches. You can't see that. You can't see that. But if I went and knocked on your door and said, you got 410 caterpillars on your oak tree, get the spray can, call the man, save the tree. You don't have to save the oak tree. This is what it does. It's been doing it for millions of years. It's sharing part of its energy with the caterpillars around it, and now we have life in our yards because it's willing to do that. I met a woman named Tallamy in New Orleans this year, and she suggests that we practice the 10-step program. Take 10 steps back from your trees and all of your insect problems disappear. Okay, black cherry, same size, 12 by 12, count the caterpillars, same day, 239 caterpillars on 14 different species. Now let's go to my neighbor's house. My neighbor moved in the same month that we did, same size property, and different plant choices. He really liked calorie pear, you might know it as Bradford pear, highly invasive ornamental from Asia. So he planted 32 of them. So the first thing I have to do is choose which calorie pear we're going to measure. Let's measure this one. Actually, the first thing we want to do is make sure he's not home. All right, we're going to measure this one, 12 by 12, count the caterpillars. I didn't find a caterpillar. One little geometric, one caterpillar, one species. Then I went to his burning bush, another. I'm pulling these plants out of my yard all the time. 4 caterpillars, one species, one little species of leaf skeletonizer, too small to be an active part of the local food web. Well, you know, in science, you replicate. We just got a pattern, but is that real or is that due to chance? You have to do it again. We're designing an experiment where replication is built in. Let's do it again the next day, July 26th. Same species, but we'll pick different plants. We get the same pattern. We get different numbers with the same pattern. 233 in the white oak, 53 in the black cherry, 2 in the burning bush, 1 on the calorie pear. And you can repeat that as many times as you want. That is the pattern you're going to get. These plants that we bring in from Asia to decorate our yards, by and large, are unable to support food webs nearly as well as the very powerful native plant genera that are producing most of the food. Rick Gartman and I gave a talk in Williamsburg, Virginia, not this past spring, but the spring before that. And after the talk, we drove home, across the Bay Bridge, and up the eastern shore of Maryland. The first building you get to is the Sunset Beach Inn and Grill. And there you go, all the calorie pears in full bloom. So it's a popular plant because of this bloom. It's got nice fall color. Doesn't live very long. You get the ice storm and down they come, about 30 years. So these guys are near the end of their life. But obviously it was the only plant that the Sunset Beach Inn and Grill liked. And you know, the fact that they're the cheapest tree you can get on the market has something to do with it. Or I kept driving right past the Sunset Beach Inn and Grill, and we got to this property right next door. Turns out the Land Conservancy owns this. I don't know how many acres it is, but look, it is thoroughly invaded with the offspring from those calorie pairs. And that's what a plant invasion is doing. So this is the horticultural ethical dilemma of our time. A lot of people would argue with property rights, the Sunset Beach Inn and Grill has the right to plant any plant it wants on its property. But does it have the right to biologically pollute or ecologically castrate all the land around it? I could drive from New York City to Richmond, Virginia when the calorie pear's in bloom, and it is white all the way down, and none of them were planted. They all have moved from our gardens. Yeah, so we get it that the Sunset Beach Inn and Grill, even though they have property rights, is not allowed to open a vial of smallpox spores. These things are tumors. They're biological tumors. We have to start thinking that. Okay. I'm just trying to illustrate that plant choice really, really matters. If I want Pandora Sphinx at my house, I want to put Virginia creeper in. You know, native grapes will do it too, but I've always only found them on Virginia creeper. And I do want that beautiful moss. So I did. I put Virginia creeper on my back porch. It came. If I do that, I also get the avid sphinx. I get the Virginia creeper sphinx. I get a number of caterpillars on Virginia creeper. If I want the tulip tree silk moth, I need tulip tree. But if I plant tulip tree, I get the tulip tree beauty. If I want sweet gum at my house, if I want lunamose at my house, it's got to be sweet gum. And I do, and I get them, but I also get the large peckies. I really wanted the zebra swallowtail. It is my favorite swallowtail. We had no pawpaws. That's all it needs is pawpaws. So I planted them. It took 9 years for them to come. The nearest colony I knew was about 26 miles away, but after 9 years, it finally came. They colonized my pawpaws, so now I have the zebra swallowtail. But then I also got the pawpaw sphinx. I didn't even know it existed, and there it is as well. A lot of things on native grapes. Spotted forester moth on native grapes. So is the pearly wood nymph and the beautiful wood nymph, the greater grapevine looper, the lesser grapevine looper, lots of things. Green marble is going to be on native viburnums, specifically the horrid zalie. So is the hummingbird sphinx moth and the rose hook-tip moth. Goldenrods, if you're looking for productive herbaceous plants, goldenrod's #1 in terms of supporting caterpillars, about 110 species. Idiosidra flower moth, the brown-hooded owlet, and of course many others. Poison ivy. Yes, I had poison ivy at home. And I finally got the beautiful utility. It's a poison ivy specialist. You know when people get poison ivy? When you're trying to pull it out. Ignore it. You can run faster than it can. It also makes really powerful berries for the birds in the fall. And we get the ipecaes as well. We have persimmon, so we get the small necklace moth. We get the sculpture moth on persimmon. The Hebrew will come on black gum, and so is the false underwing. Two-toned ancillus on ironwood. Ash produces a lot of things. Our four beleaguered ashes, the wave sphinx, very beautiful. Fawn sphinx, which I think is art in the garden. Maple is very powerful. Rosy maple moth, the large maple spanworm, the maple dentum dagger moth, and of course many others. This is the most spectacular caterpillar in North America, the hickory horned devil. It could be a walnut or hickory. That's what the adult looks like. By the way, these things don't sting you. Perfectly harmless caterpillar. Elm, very powerful plant. We get the double-toothed prominent, and it's crazy-looking larva. And the elm sphinx, very beautiful sphinx moth, the interrupted dagger moth, and lots of others. Orange-headed epicalema, witch hazel dagger moth, only on witch hazel, but you also get the mustard sallow. You get the imperial pine on black cherry, the imperial moth on pine on black cherry, and then you also get the eastern panthea. Or even our native clematis will give us a moth with spotted iris. Greenbrier, curved-line owlet. Blueberries are going to give us the beautiful Drexel statana. Buttonbush, the lost owlet. Native willows, the herald. Snowberry clearwing on our native honeysuckle, coral honeysuckle. Evening primrose, one of our prettiest moths, is on evening primrose. The showy emerald on sumac, and I'm not talking about poison sumac. I'm talking about things like staghorn sumac, smooth sumac. Winged sumac, great soil stabilizers. Poison sumac is a plant of the swamp. I've never even seen it. Golden rod stowaway on ditch daisy, Vitis aristosa, Now, our ferns don't produce a lot of moths, but this is when they do. New York fern makes the pink shaded fern moth. Even our parasitic plants make moths. The obtuse yellow. Then you get the big powerhouses. Black cherry makes lots of moths. Things like the white furcula, the crocus geometer. Some of our giant silk moths like the Io moth. Colorful Zalea is on here. The beautiful Cecropia moth. Tufted bird dropping moth. The paddle caterpillar. You know, tell your kids to go out in the yard and figure out what those paddles are for. They have a function. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. You got to figure out what it is. The small-eyed sphinx, lots of things. The filaments of the filament geometer, same function as the paddles on the paddle caterpillar. Figure it out. The Harris's three-spot holds the head capsule from its old skins, like an umbrella over its head. We don't know why it does that, but it does it. Then oaks, extremely powerful plants, make the hag moth, kind of looks like a tarantula. The red-washed prominent looks like a Pillsbury doughboy. White-dotted prominent. By the way, they will bite you. Don't put your finger in. The spiny oak caterpillar, skiff moth, white-blotched heterocambidae, oak skeletonizer, polyphemus moth, half-oval ancillus. White Archimedes is an interesting one. It eats a fungus in between the crevices of oak bark. Very specialized. My favorite, the spun-glass slug, puss caterpillar, and literally hundreds more. Now, I dragged you through all of those for a reason. I took all those pictures at my house, and that's what my house looked like when we moved in. We're entering our 18th year, but I got a lot of those very, very early on. So this area was mowed for hay before we moved in, and that's what it looked like 2 summers ago. I've been counting the moth species, and now up to 805, because we put the plants back. We put all these plants, witches, oaks, persimmons, all these guys down to ants, ironwood. We tolerated these. Very powerful plants. Most people think black cherries are weed, you get rid of it. No, don't get rid of it. New York fern, grapes, weeds, tulip trees, dodder, yes. Poison ivy, we tolerate that too, and then we get a number of moths. And because we have those moths, we get the things that eat those moths. We get the birds that need those caterpillars for their food. We now finally have breeding wood thrush on the property because we've got the sphinx moths that help feed them. We've got lettered sphinx because we have Virginia creeper. We have indigo bunnings breeding there because we've got the food. In this case, it's probably the ruby quaker on alder. We've got, because we have alder. We've got chipping sparrows because we've got black walnut making gray edge boma loca. We've got field sparrows because we have oaks making the red line anapoda. Tufted titmouse because we've got black cherries making down opinion, and we certainly have my friend the chickadee. Then we've got tulip trees making the tulip tree beauty. White agarias, spicebush making spicebush swallowtail. We've got house wrens because we've got hickories making copper underwing. We've got bluebirds because we've got sycamores making drab prominence. We have 54 species of breeding bird at home because we put those plants back. This really works, is the only point I'm trying to make here. Which plants should we have in our landscapes? That becomes really, really important. We've made a lot of lists. This is the first list we made. It is a ranking of the woody plant genera in the mid-Atlantic states, and that does include Connecticut. The numbers after each plant genus of the number of species of Lepidoptera, moths and butterflies, recorded as feeding on those plant genera in the literature. So memorize that. You know, when we made this, we realized it was a popular list. People wanted the same list for every state, wherever I went. Where's my list? So the Forest Service funded my technician, Kimberly Structure, to make a list for every state, for every county, in every state. And that is on the National Wildlife Federation website. It's called Native Plant Finder. That's all you have to put in. If you go to that website and put in your zip code, a ranked list of the woody and herbaceous plants for your county will pop up. So now there's no more excuses about not knowing which the best plants is for your county, wherever you live. New Mexico, it doesn't matter. It will pop up. But when we made these lists all over the place, we noticed a very powerful pattern. And that is, again, that there's really just a few plants making most of the moth species. I started calling them foraging hubs. I borrowed a term from people who study birds in the tropics, foraging on trees that make lots of fruit, things like figs. I've learned that you don't like that term. But this was my reasoning. I was sitting on a Delta plane once, and we weren't going anywhere, sitting in the tarmac, so I'm reading the Delta magazine. Those are the Delta hubs. And I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. Let's make them foraging. Okay, oak, willow, cherry, pine, all of the lines going into this oak, could be a bird, could be a species of bird, could be a lizard, something going into that tree because that tree is making a lot of food. Same with these other plants up here. All these other black dots in the landscape, they are plants as well. And there are lines going into them as well, but not very many because they're not making very much food. And it turns out that just 5% of the local plant genera, local native plant genera, are producing between 73 and 75% of the caterpillar abundance and diversity that we could have in that area. So let's say 73, 75% of the food that's driving your food price. I could flip that on its head and say, I could make a landscape using 95% of the available plant genera. But if I didn't include these really powerful ones, we can call them foraging hubs or keystone genera. Let's use keystone genera. I would still have a failed food web. I'd only have 25 to 27% of the food that I could have. So this is a nuance. It used to be that native plants and cut down on the number of non-native plants you have. But now we need to pick the right native plants. We're learning more. We need to pick the most powerful ones. Then we can diversify with these other less powerful native plants after we've got the support from these keystone genera. And when we landscape without thinking about keystone genera, we are not fooling the birds. Here's a little bit of data from my PhD student, Desiree Narengo, working with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. She's following 93 pairs of chickadees. She's finishing up her study now, 3 years of following these guys and looking at their breeding success in relation to the landscape in which they're breeding. So this is one pair, that's where the nest is. This is the foraging territory. 95% of the foraging happens within that red line, and 95% of the foraging happens on those blue areas, the plants covered by those blue areas. Let's look at what they are. They're all the native trees in this landscape. Basswood, sweet gum, American elm, black cherry, 2 species of oaks. Let's also look at the plants the birds are not foraging on, and those are all the plants from Asia. Japanese maples and silk trees, ginkgo, black poplar, great marilla, saucer magnolia. Very easy to picture a landscape in which those are the dominant plants. This is a summary of what she found when she compared landscapes with the dominated by non-natives with landscapes dominated by native plants. When they're dominated by introduced plants, they produce 75% fewer caterpillars. They were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. So she put a nest box up on all these guys. The opportunity to breed was there, but the couple came and they said, there's simply not enough food here. We're not even going to try. If they did try, they laid 1.5 fewer eggs. The nest was 29% less likely to survive at all. They produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and they delayed maturation by 1.5 days. And you might think those aren't huge differences there, but when you put all that into a population growth model, it does have error bars around it, and they always seem to disappear with this type of projection. But this is replacement rate. That's the number of chicks the population has to make to replace adults that are lost every year. That's the only level of reproduction that is sustainable. Anything below that line is not sustainable. And this is all as a function of the non-native plants in the landscape. So the error bars did overlap replacement rate, but it was about 20% non-native plants or fewer or less. When you get more than 25% non-native plants, you're well below replacement rate. So this becomes an ecological sink. It's drawing birds in to reproduce, but they can't reproduce enough to replace their populations. Surely this has something to do with that steep decline we see in birds all over the country. We're building landscapes that starve. How we plant these trees turns out to be very important for moth survival. We just have to think through the entire life cycle of our moths. Let me use a little example from Pennsylvania. We have 511 species of caterpillars developing on oaks in Pennsylvania. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth here, complete their development on the oak tree. The caterpillars eat the leaves and they spin a cocoon here. If it's wintertime, they spend the whole winter up on the tree, and then they emerge as an adult. So they're fine. But 480 of those species, 94%, drop from the tree. And they either pupate in the soil or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that is under the tree. So when we landscape like this, all of those species that are coming out of the trees, I don't know what these are, but let's say they're all oaks, another ecological trap. You're drawing in adults to oviposit here, make caterpillars, and they're not going to be able to tunnel into the ground here. This is all hard-packed soil. It's mowed, they're ground up, no leaf litter. And of course, the cement landscape is not a good option either. This is the opportunity to do creative gardening. Here we have a tree, but we've created the perfect ground and shrub layer that encourages moth survival once the insects drop out of that tree. We've got a nice native azalea, some ferns, spring ephemerals, a layered landscape like this. This is actually up in Alaska. Very beautiful, but perfect place for those moths to survive. Do your spring ephemerals at the base of your trees. Again, nobody's walking in there, squishing them or mowing them. The typical ground covers. This is mayapple, does well, ginger, native pachysandra. You don't need the pachysandra from China. All of those things are going to encourage moth survival once they leave the tree. Then finally, our security lights are killing moths. They're killing moths. Many of these moths, particularly the giant silk moths and many other species, don't even have mouth parts as adults. All the energy they're ever going to have, they got in the larval stage, and if they spend that energy flying around the light all night long, either the bat comes and eats them, or they don't have enough energy to do what they're supposed to do. Put motion cameras on your security lights. You can still be secure, and actually they work a lot better. When you have a security light all on all the time, look at the dark shadows it throws. The bad man knows exactly where to go so that you can't see. If it's a motion sensor, he doesn't even know it's there, and all of a sudden it flicks on, he runs away. So, motion sensors will save moths. There was a recent study came out in Europe, where they studied the night-flying moths in a field with night vision goggles. Then they erected streetlights in that same field. 62% moth decline once those lights came up. So the fact that we're lighting up the world at night is another reason we're losing our insects. We don't need to do that. Okay, by choosing the right plants in our landscapes, we really could create the insects that we're losing. We could save them. We could save nature's relationships that are running our ecosystems. And we could do it pretty much everywhere. We just change our goal from focusing on strictly aesthetics to focusing on function as well. So I started with E.O. Wilson. I want to end with E.O. Wilson. He's a Harvard professor. He's professor emeritus, but he's still writing a book every year. He's 87. The book he wrote last year was called Half Earth. Ever read Half Earth? It's always one person. Read Half Earth. You don't have to read. I'll tell you what it's all about. E.O. is, he's getting desperate. He's not trying to get a Pulitzer Prize anymore. He is not mincing words. He says very simply, we're going to save functional ecosystems, life on Earth. We need to save half of the planet. Got to save ecosystem function on half of the planet. And then he pretty much ended the book. He didn't spend a lot of time telling us how we're going to do that. And people, even though everybody's sympathetic, let's say half the planet, they're scratching their heads. Agriculture already has taken half the planet. All of us, our 7.4 billion of us, and all of our infrastructure and our airports and everything else is in the other half. Where are we going to find that third half that E.O.'s talking about? Well, to realize E.O.'s dream, and I think we can do that, we need a new approach to conservation. The UN has designated biological or biosphere reserves as places of ecosystem, of ecological significance. Biosphere reserves as places of ecosystem significance. I can't talk. I think that is a mistake, because that implies that only places rich in biodiversity have ecological significance. All places have ecological significance, and we need to start thinking that way. This place has ecological significance that it has lost, so we must put it back. Remember, the 85.6% of us, that private land, in addition to saving biodiversity where there's still a lot of diversity, in our traditional mode of conservation, we also have to save it where we humans abound. We have to save it right in our yards. So you don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but please consider saving it where you live. You are the future of conservation. This empowers each one of us. No longer can you sit there and say, well, it's an environmental issue, but I can't do anything about it. You can do something about it. As a matter of fact, you must do something about it. So as a property owner, the future of conservation is in your hands. And remember what the Donald says, make America's insects again. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have time for questions, and then after the questions, there'll be a chance to use the restroom and talk to Doug or get by a book or whatever. Get your book signed.
Yes. So, you know, I appreciate your talk. It's great.
But
no, I'm a full believer. My backyard is. I read the book years ago.
don't forget your friend.
I've gone way down that road already. But I'm looking at conservation trust land. I'm looking at open space. Connecticut has a great track record with setting aside land, but it's been invaded by invasives. We're kind of leaving that as an opportunity that towns need to start thinking about, you know, doing something. And what should we be planting white oaks and black cherries and the top tens out there?
Of course.
And I mean,
Of course.
is that really what
These keystone genera work everywhere. You know, with all the land conservancy, we've saved a lot of land in this country, but the biggest problem they have is they're not managing it. They don't have the budget to manage it. The people that buy these lands, I'm on the board of a big conservancy in Pennsylvania, and it's lawyers, it's bank manager. These guys know how to buy the property and manipulate the money. Once they get the property, they've got one or two land managers that are struggling. They don't have the resources, and by and large, they don't have the knowledge of how to do it. So that's the biggest challenge. Some of them are even saying, well, maybe we should stop buying our land and just focus on taking care of what we have. You know, we need the resources to do both. We want to save as much land as possible, but you do have to manage it. That is the curse of these invasive species. In the old days, if it was all native species, you could let it go and it would go through succession and do everything you wanted it to do. No longer. So yes, we have to find the resources. I keep thinking of how to do that. I don't know, prison labor, volunteers. We have a lot of money in this country. We spend it on things that I wouldn't spend it on. And we can afford this if we elevate it in terms of priority. We're a long way from that. You know, we've got the politicians making the policy. Again, they're all lawyers. They know nothing about any of this, but we elect them. So we have to make this an issue that's important to us, and we have to say, pay attention to this or you're out. And if we do that as a group, it'll work. You look at the top 10 things that people worry about in an election, environment's not there. So, yeah.
Where do you get your sources for your native plants? Like, in other words, if you simply want to keep your yard, how do you go about it?
Okay, that used to be more of a challenge than it is now. First of all, the Google is a wonderful thing. Every state has a native plant society, and they know all the people selling them. So go to their website. Is anybody nurseryman here? They often come to my talks. But you are.
So, well, I'm familiar with sources. So for our area, there's a place up in Amherst that's, I can't remember the name, it's Related Plants or something with you can actually.
Oh yeah, New England wildfire, absolutely.
Yeah, so you can buy specific trays or plugs or their other options.
They're not as rare as you think. Even many traditional nurseries are carrying more native stock. Figure out what you want. You go to the nursery and say, do you have this? And if they say no, they say, can you get it? And if they say no, then walk away. Don't settle for something else. And if enough people do that, they'll say, oh, there's a market here, and we'll start to carry.
I would also add that even though it's Colorado, Prairie Moon Nursery sells the whole trays of plugs. It's $100 for 38 if you buy one species, and we've done it.
Actually, it's Minnesota. It's Minnesota.
Or is it Minnesota? They're county presses.
Earth tone native plant nursery. So these things are around. But you know, putting native plants in Connecticut, and these they all pop up as advertisements. Anything else? Yes.
Another really good source of native plants is in nature, and they sort of grow out there.
Oh.
So if you find like good populations that are large and healthy, you can take a small number of small young plants in the spring before they start to leaf out, get a big chunk of soil around them so you have certain roots, and take 2 or 3 from a huge healthy population and bring it to your yard, and then they'll make seeds. And
Yeah, we have to be a little careful about that. We don't want to be, the place to do that is called rescue places, where there's a new development coming in, it's all going to be leveled, and they'll often tell people, and then you go in, you can take all of them.
there's so many people do it though, if you do 2 or 3 and you can keep it alive.
Seeds too, don't forget seeds. Remember my acorns I planted? 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to answer that question, the North Central Conservation District, spring plant sale is underway. The deadline to order is April 4th, and the web address is conservect.org. And you can pick them up in Vernon, April 20th. There's a lot of native plants available for sale.
Goodwin Forest.
Yeah, Goodwin State Forest has a native plant sale every year. And there's also a place in Eastford, Connecticut that's run by Deb Lee, who's a master gardener with Econ. And they have
Trails.
yes, that place is fabulous. They have all native plants of any size, shape, variety that you could possibly want.
There's more around than used to be.
And there's a few in Rhode Island as well, so if you go to the internet, you can find them. They're around.
Anything else? Yes?
I looked at my master gardener certification in Rhode Island, and one of the things that they did, and I'm not sure about what UConn has done, is they actually created a database. So they cross-referenced all the species of plants and then their living conditions that they needed, and then they tagged that with the nurseries. So that if people said they wanted to add Solidago to their yard, for example, they could just tag that plant, and when they clicked on it, then all the links to the nurseries came up. So it really helped people to say, okay, you're going to go to one stop to get your information, and then be able to have that access. So I'm not sure if UConn's ever done that or consider it, but that seemed to increase the purchase of native plants.
That website I showed, the National or Native Plant Finder, that's one of their goals, is for every county in the U.S. to have the people who sell the native plants from that county. They're trying to get that information.
And you know to buy local, so you can also go on the internet and get native species that were grown or the genotypes are from a pretty distant place. And you really don't want to be mixing genotypes. So if you can buy local, you'll always buy local. And I would be really cautious about purchasing something more than 500 miles away or something like that. Even though it's native, it could be quite a different genotype.
And if I could just add to that, don't forget about what will just grow in your yard naturally. My yard is loaded with native plants that almost all will just remain natural.
Yes.
I have a 80 by 80 foot spot in my backyard that I've been thinking about just letting go. And so I'm trying to figure out what's the best approach. Somebody said to rototill first? No. Okay.
There's a tremendous seed bank. What is it now, grass?
It's been grass for
Yeah,
the 30 years
okay.
I've been there. They said if I just put the seed down that birds would come. So I don't know, should I do a mix of the plants and flowers?
You should, instead of just say let it go, you should have a plan about what you want it to be. If you're trying to make it a meadow, you really have to get rid of that grass first, because it will outcompete the young plants you're putting in. Meadows seem like the easiest thing to do. They're actually one of the hardest things to do. In this part of the country, it wants to be a forest, so you have to make sure the woodies don't come in. So there are lots of literature on how to make a meadow, but your biggest initial competitor is the grass that's in your meadow. So if it's 80 by 80, I know what the professionals would do. They come in and they spray Roundup and kill it, and they do it 2 or 3 times to make sure that it's dead, and then they can have success right away. If you don't want to do that, you can put out black plastic and some other things for months. You've got to kill the roots that are under there. And then you're starting with a clean slate. When you turn over that soil, the seed bank that's in there, you're releasing it. So there are weed seeds in there you don't want that will last for years and years and years. So that's why I say don't rototill. But have a plan. What do you really want to be in there? If you say, okay, I want the blue jays to plant an acorn, you just need a little spot like this. Loosen it up, and that's exactly what they do. You come in and put an acorn in there because they're storing it for the winter. They're going to forget where they did that, and it germinates. We did that a lot at home. Works really well.
So maybe different plans for different sections of it. So I want it to be diverse. I
Right.
just don't know.
So it depends on how sunny it is and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it's something you can pick at. You don't have to do it all at once. Yes.
Have you looked, in addition to ecosystem services, for example, to benefit birds and other animals, have you looked at benefits to natural predators or parasitoids? Are there any, things that you can tell about that?
Well, see, if you build a diverse food web from the bottom, the natural enemies, those predators and things will come.
Have you looked at any increase in
Oh, have we
species or
measured
any
it?
surveys have you done?
Well, no. The closest we've gotten is, the birds are predators, and we've measured some of them. Beyond that, we have, these studies are actually fairly hard to do, but the logic is there. It's pretty easy to predict what's going to happen. Yes?
You have that slide that showed the end of the pear trees growing. Do you ever foresee a time where more commercial locations will start planting more beneficial plants? I feel like that's such an opportunity that's going to lost with the garbage that we bring up.
I do see that time. We have to get to that time. The Sunset Beach Inn and Grill planted those trees 30 years ago, and it was just the thing to do. The guy who created that Bradford pear cultivar out of calorie pear, I think he's dead at this point, but he said that was the worst thing he ever did in his career. So but it's done now, so it's you got to undo all that, and we get new information. When the culture changes, so that people appreciate all the plants in your yard need to be doing something instead of just looking at something. We won't be planting calorie pear anymore. We know it's a huge problem. Yeah, be optimistic.
Maybe one more question.
What about gypsy moss in the dead state forests?
Uh-huh. What about the gypsy moss? So everything I said about making insects does not include bringing insects in from someplace else. They're just like the plants from someplace else. They are here without any natural enemies. Look at the problems we're having from gypsy moth, from winter moth, from Japanese beetles, emerald ash borer, hemlock woolly adelgid, on and on and on. These are all insects brought in from someplace else without the controls that keep them in balance. So should you kill gypsy moths? Yes. Are you ever going to kill enough of them? No. Yeah, they eat everything, and they kill the oaks, the most powerful tree. Not good. Not good.
Yeah, you stand a chance of losing your oaks this year, particularly if it's droughty at the time you get defoliation. So if you want to, a lot of you have really high egg masses. This is the time of year to pull them down off your trees. This infestation will disappear very quickly. We don't know how long, but if you get defoliated plus a dry spring, then you could be paying $3,000 to have that tree removed from your yard. So watch out for it.
But if we get a wet spring, there is a fungus that breaks out and controls it very, very effectively. But
Right.
you need the moisture.
Yeah, so right now the fungus hit near the end of last year's infestation, so a lot of you saw the gypsy moth disappear, but we're seeing very, very spotty, extremely high egg masses, dangerous levels. But if it's wet spring, Doug's right, there's enough inoculum out there now that we expect that the whole thing will collapse. Listen, you guys have been here for an hour and a half. It's been awesome. Thanks, Doug. Maybe give him another hand. Doug will stick around. We don't really have to be anywhere for a while, so you can sign books if you have other questions or get your book signed. We'll be here for probably at least a half an hour or something. Thanks for coming out on this Saturday.